Rutilio Romero is our guest today on Spotlight. You're going to ask what he does. I had to, too. I'd never heard the name Rutilio Romero. He's from New Mexico, or lives there now, but the big thing that he does is teach happiness. He said back 17 or 18 years ago that 85% of all ills are mental. They're caused by psychological conditions or mental conditions. And doctors laughed at him, but they're not laughing today. And we're going to find out why here on Spotlight with Rutilio Romero. Thousands of students all over the United States have attended Rutilio Romero's personal happiness conferences. I question a little bit the motives of the personal happiness conferences. I did question them until I met Dr. Romero, who is a doctor of chiropractic. I want to launch into this in the most logical way by saying, back in 1960, how did you get started on this effort?
Well, in 1960, Don, I was given 3 months to live. I had cancer of the left shoulder. The ball of the left shoulder was completely eaten up, and there was just a fine film of calcium left when I went and had x-rays made, and the doctors gave me 3 months to live. I went to the country, and you know, when you've got one foot in the grave and one on a banana peel, you've got to do a lot of thinking and soul searching.
Yes.
And I came to understand as I lived in the country that I really had lived on hell resentment most of my life. See, my mother was Irish and my dad was Mexican, and my grandfather Higgins resented the fact that my mother wanted to marry a Mexican. But in spite of his objections, they ran off and got married. You see, that meant that my mother had gotten married out of the church, which was very traditional. It was a mortal sin, and she had disobeyed her parents. Well, it was in that environment that I was conceived, and from the time of conception I knew I was unwanted by my mother and my grandfather. So I grew up resenting that fact very much. Even though I became a doctor and helped thousands of people, the resentment was there eating away at me and finally manifested itself into a disease.
You're saying then that the mental condition that you suffered, that is the resentment,
That's
caused
right.
the disease,
Right.
the physical disease.
Right, because it causes a pH imbalance in the chemistry of the body, which causes the disease factor.
There are medical doctors I know who claim that most mental sicknesses are chemical imbalances, that they are not psychologically caused at all, even though the psychological cause may be back here, that the chemical imbalance occurs that causes a person to be, say, schizophrenic.
Right.
Would you agree with that?
Oh, definitely. You can see that without being a doctor or having had the training. You can take an ordinary man that's a very beautiful person down to the corner bar and give him about 6 double shots of liquor, and that intoxicates his brain, and in a few minutes he's beaten up the whole place. It's changed and altered his consciousness through the intoxication. And that's the same thing that happens with a person when you're angry all the time, or resentful, or full of hate or vengeance. We are creating the same type of chemistry in our body.
So you're saying that we mentally cause most of our ills?
I really truly believe that, and I see it happening, because when we have our students change their attitudes about themselves and get onto the personal happiness understanding, we see those conditions change.
Let me point out, too, and if I'm wrong, please correct me.
Yes.
But you are not, as a doctor of chiropractic, plugging chiropractic medicine at all.
No, I'm not. I'm not. It's just a part of the healing system is all. What I'm interested in more than anything else is getting people to get their heads on straight. That's where it's at.
And so you've given up active practice as a chiropractor, I would presume.
No, I still practice 2 to 3 days in the office a week, and then I travel on the weekends. I still have many patients that were not able to be healed because of the fact that they did not change their attitudes through chiropractic, and changing their attitudes regain their health back, just like I did.
How do you go about changing a person's attitude in a symposium? You've got a whole group of people.
Right.
And you're talking in an auditorium or a meeting room. How do you change their attitudes without working with them individually?
Well, the first thing that we do there, Don, is that there are basic reasons for people having the attitude they have. In fact, there are 4 basic emotions which man uses constantly to try to survive under the law of survival, and that's hate, anger, resentment, and fear. Now, we have found the basis for the beginning of these emotions in each individual, and as you teach people to understand the basis of it, where it's coming from, then you can certainly help them to change these attitudes.
You have some dimensions listed here on this sheet. You say there is a mental dimension, a physical dimension, the social dimension, the financial dimension, and the spiritual dimension.
Yes, Don.
May we take those one at a time, and let's start at the bottom.
Okay.
The spiritual dimension. I don't say that that's the least important, but that's at the bottom of the list.
Why?
Our attitude, it says here, about our Creator and creation.
Right.
How must we change that in order to achieve personal happiness?
Well, the very first thing that we have, remember, we're not interested in teaching or changing a person's religion. It's only to help them understand that we are a son and daughter of life. We cannot deny that, whether we call it God or call it whatever name we want to. But we are a son and daughter of life. And it is our relationship with that life, that inborn life that we have, which is the life given for us, that we, if we learn how to cooperate with it, can restore us to health and bring us life. So it is our attitude. Most of us, because of conditioning, feel that we're unworthy because we've been sinful people, we've been told that we come from evil and things like this, that if we really believe in a true God, a God of love, we have to overcome that conditioning.
Would it be oversimplification to say that you want people to feel comfortable with themselves spiritually?
Oh, definitely. That is not oversimplification, that is truth. If you don't feel yourself comfortably spiritually, well, you're always feeling guilty, and everyone can make you feel guilty, and we want you to be master of yourself, Don.
How many people come to you, Dr. Romero, and say that they think you're a kook, that they think you're so far out that you have left the mainstream of life in your teachings?
Well, in 1960, Don, when I first came out with the idea that 85% of the world was sick because they were mentally thinking wrong, that doesn't mean that they were insane, but we have negative thoughts constantly. I found 80% of, well, about 98% of the time, most people are thinking negatively, not only of themselves, but of the world. And then most of the people thought I was kooky. Today, I'm an accepted fact that what I've been saying is right. In fact, some of the medical profession is saying that 95% of the thinking is causing people to be sick.
We'll follow that a little bit more, and we'll talk
Why?
about your other dimensions, specifically the financial dimension, as we work from the bottom of the list up.
Beautiful.
With Rutilio Romero, our guest on Spotlight today. There are medical doctors that I think I mentioned before,
Yes, Don.
whom I know personally, and they say that 95% of their patients have physical ills that are brought on by mental conditions. Even though they may be real physical ills, they're not saying that the ills are not real.
No, they're real,
But
Don.
they're brought on by tensions, by the fact that the women who come in are having difficulty with their husbands, or the men are having difficulty with their wives, or with business, or with relatives, or whatever.
Right, Don.
Yeah. Now, you talked about the financial dimension here in this
Right,
list
Don.
of items that we must overcome and straighten out in order to make our lives tranquil, happy, and physically free of mentally caused illnesses.
Right, Don. Well, we found out as I began to work with the physical man, and as I began to bring about a change in his body. I found that he would come back, though, a few days later, a few weeks later, a few months later with another illness. And until we got the spiritual dimension balanced and the physical, we were not making the headway that I wanted to make, or I felt I should make, in the mental dimension.
Yeah.
And then I began to realize that if man is not paying his bills, that is a tremendous stress. In fact, a doctor in England recently ran a survey on heart attacks and found that most of the men who had had heart attacks had a financial problem. We also have done research, and most of the divorces start with lack of money. Now, people can kid me when they say, well, Doc, I'm all right spiritually. You know, I believe in God and all of these things, and mentally I have a good mind, and physically I'm not very sick, and socially I get along with everybody. But when it comes to dollars and cents, and you put it down on black and white, either you're making it or you're not. You can be making a lot of money, but if you're not paying all of your bills, and if you're not putting a little aside, then you're out of balance. And we found that this is one of the dimensions that's mostly out of balance and causes all the other dimensions to get out of balance. So we really emphasize in our work, in our symposium, that the balance, financial balance, must be there.
How do you propose that this be done? Let's assume that somebody is behind in their bills, has no savings, and their income is relatively modest.
Well, the first thing that we do is have them change their attitude about that modest income. Most of them are angry with their boss or their job or cussing their job out instead of changing their attitude about it. And the moment we change our attitude, then the chemistry begins to flow to help us bring about a balance. For instance, some of the cases, I can just give you examples that come to my mind. If a wife gets mad at a husband, maybe he went on a fishing trip. She goes out and buys $3,000 or $4,000 worth of furniture and hawks him in for another 2 or 3 years of bills and adds to the stress of the income. And a lot of men, to get even with their wives, well, they'll go out and hang it on every night or every other night, spend $40 or $50 at the bar, which is their business, but it still affects their family. It affects the total picture of the family unit. And so this is where the change comes, is learning to appreciate your job first. The biggest factor in bringing about a balance in finances, to me, has been appreciation.
So it doesn't matter how much you make in terms of the figure, you're saying.
Right.
But it matters how you consider that amount and then how you use it.
How you use it. For instance, a fellow that I know that came to our symposium about 2 years ago made $1 million that year, but still was $300,000 in the hole. And he finally had to declare bankrupt, and he went to a modest college, started teaching at $25,000 a year, which was unbelievable for him, having come from, you know,
Yes.
$1 million income in real estate. And with that $25,000 income, he was able to have money in the bank and savings because he changed his attitude. He began to use his money the way that was best for the whole family. Buying the family everything they want isn't always the best things if you're going and hawk for it.
The practical aspect of your approach really impresses me. Sometimes people like yourself come on the air on programs like this one.
Yes, sir.
And they are far out. They are, quote, kooks.
Right.
Or they're trying to be evangelists and selling God.
Surely.
You are not doing that specifically.
No, we're selling personal happiness. I feel that the God-given right of every American, of every human being, is to be happy and to have abundance. We just ran a class 9 months ago for the state of New Mexico on welfare recipients. By these, I mean chronic people who'd been on welfare, who, you know, have been just accepting the dole of the state.
Yes.
We put them through our symposium, with our instructors, for 3 months. Now, that was only 10 people. The average dropout of any class in the state of New Mexico for helping what we call human resources here in Georgia is 50%. We had only one lady drop out of the course, and she dropped out because she didn't have a babysitter, couldn't afford one. and the state wasn't helping her along those lines. But she's seen that every one of her children has taken Simposium. But 9 out of those 10 went out and got their own jobs and have been working for 9 months.
Why are you successful when other agencies or units are not?
Well, maybe it's because I just don't believe in failure. I don't believe that a man has to fail. Once you understand how to go about being successful, but you do have to learn how to do it.
Would you describe yourself as an incurable optimist?
Well, I think you might say that, but I also see reality where reality is. You know, I cannot ignore the truth of life and things, you know. But it's like everything. Where are you taught to learn how to live in school all the time?
You're not, are you?
Okay, you're not. And you see, that's what we're getting to, that you've got to be taught. I can tell you, Don, if you're a nervous person, you go home and you quit being nervous now. You be sure, and you just don't let things bother you, Don. But if I don't teach you how to do it, how are you going to do it, Don?
Well, you can't.
And that's what life is all about. We have to be taught how to live. It's a shame that we have to wait to have a person in trouble to begin to help them and teach them.
We want you to teach us about the social, physical, and mental dimension, the 3 other items on your list when we come
Don.
back.
Okay, Don.
With Dr. Rutilio Romero. In an air of cynicism, I just asked Mr. Romero during the break how important the money is that he makes in these symposiums. Because so often, people who are evangelists, and Dr. Romero is not an evangelist in the ordinary sense of the word, are thinking about money, and they are the ones who drive the big cars and wear the silk suits and run around with the giant diamond rings, and are the typical concept of the hokey evangelist who doesn't give a damn about God or spiritualism. He's really thinking about himself and how big a meal he's going to eat and how beautiful the girl is that he's going to be with that night. I want to point out that we're not accusing you of this.
All right.
What I'm saying, though, is how important is the money you make in the symposiums to you personally?
The importance of the money to me personally that is made in Simposium is only important from the standpoint that we can then open up another city, another state to share our work with. That's the importance. The money that I get, that I spend, is off of my practice. And that's where most of my money comes for my living expenses and so forth. I have a modest home. I drive a 73 Olds. I have a pickup truck, which I drive. Most of the time, my wife drives the car. So that, to me, showing off these things, I would rather allow the extra money that I may have to some student that can't afford to come.
Are you in financial balance personally?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Even with the government, yes. I make sure that I keep that balance.
Let's hit these other 3 dimensions.
Okay.
The social dimension.
Social dimension is very important in relationship to our personal happiness, is the way we get along with other people. Most people think they're doing all right. They come into work in the morning, and the first thing they say, oh, I had a heck of a night last night. It's very interesting in the hospital to hear the nurses come in, see which one complains the most of who has the most pains and who had the worst headache. Yeah. Instead of coming in uplifted and uplifting our patients, and we doctors do the same thing. Of course, some of it is a hangover once in a while.
Yes.
You know, but the thing is that most of us think that we are all right, but we really don't realize the effect we have on other people with our negativity. And this is the thing that we're interested in. For instance, an organization like yours in this studio, if everyone comes in lifting one another up, that is projected out to the audience in the whole metropolis of Atlanta. And pretty soon everybody catches on. But if you come in with a draggy face, and the next person's got a draggy face, and most people are complaining about their bosses or their employees. This is what we're talking about, a balance in our social relationship between husbands and wives and people who live together, and, you know, relationships, and parents and children. That's where I really first noticed it in my own self, was when I was speaking to my children with such anger and the way they would retaliate. That really started me thinking on this social dimension, you know. The little kids that age, you know, 5 or 6, with such hate in their eyes for their parents.
You're not proposing any magical formula then. You're just telling people how they may readjust their thinking and their direction.
Right.
So that their lives can take on a more optimistic, positive attitude.
It does take on a positive attitude, a better way of life, a happier way of life. We've seen families where the father was 80 years old and had ruled with an iron hand 6 big men, you know, and come to the understanding of what he'd done and stand up in Simposium and apologize to his boys for the way he treated them.
The physical dimension, quickly.
Physical dimension is, as we said, the mind affects the body. And you can, in Simposium, you will quickly be shown how to correct those physical conditions by changing your attitude.
And then the most important, the mental dimension, which we've left till last.
Right.
We have about 1.5 minutes to talk about that.
Well, let me say this way. Your mind is like a seed. You plant the seed of corn in the ground, and it has the power to attract to itself all the forces of the universe to make it grow and bear fruit. But so has the power of a weed if you plant it in the ground. So our mind is the same way. If we plant positive thoughts, we have the same power as that seed of corn to attract to ourselves all the energies to make it grow. But if we have plant negative seeds, we have the same power. So my question is, how does your garden grow today?
I talked to Jose Silva, who happens to be Mexican
person.
too,
Yeah.
of Mexican ancestry. And he says that negative vibrations emanate from a person who is negative for 25 feet around. Now,
Right.
he puts it on a physical basis, that the air is ionized or whatever.
Right.
And a person within that area, 25 feet from negativism, will pick up negative thoughts.
Definitely.
Would you think
I
along
would
those
agree
lines?
with that, yes, sir. Because you can walk into a room where there's been a tussle and you can feel it. You can feel it immediately.
The tension.
You feel the tension. Or into an organization. I can just walk down the hallways of an organization and tell you just how it's functioning.
Dr. Rutilio Romero, our guest on Spotlight today.
Thank you. Thank you, John.